Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of 5 Question Friday, where I do my best to answer the great questions you all have sent in. We've got 5 great topics today. Number one, we're going to look at some of the best places to park your cash today, which is particularly important given that the Fed's lowered the short-term interest rates a bit, and so yields have come down. We'll take a look at that. Should you invest or pay off student loans? Number 3, are Schwab's target date retirement funds a solid option? We'll take a look at that. And then when should you start spending down money in a traditional retirement account like a traditional 401k or IRA? And then finally, should a tips ladder be part of your retirement portfolio? So those are the topics we're going to cover. If you'd like to send in a question, the best way to do it is to subscribe to the newsletter I send out every Sunday. It's free. You can subscribe with the link below this video, and then just hit reply to any email you receive from me. I do read them all, and I've got a growing list of questions to respond to. So what I'm going to start doing, in addition to the 5 Question Friday videos, I've started sort of organizing your questions around certain topics. And so I'll do sort of a frequently asked questions video with, 5 to 10 questions maybe around Roth conversions or around, withdrawal strategies or whatever the topic may be. I've started to collect them that way. So those videos should be coming out hopefully in the next few weeks, and then I'll have more of those as time goes by, because I literally have, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of questions. So 5 every Friday just ain't getting it done. So that's what I'm going to start doing, and hopefully, you'll find it helpful. All right, enough chit chat. Let's get to the first question. It comes from Anna. Where should we park funds earmarked for Roth conversion taxes? My husband and I are both 55, retired this year due to some health reasons. They're going to start doing, I'll just shorten the question a bit, they're going to start doing some Roth conversions over the next 5 to 6 years. And they want to know, where should they keep the money that they'll need to pay for those taxes? And I think it's a great question just generally. Where are some of the best places to park cash? So I'm going to show you some very specific examples. Generally, when I think through this, I think about a couple of factors to account for. Of course, obviously, the interest rate or the yield, that's important. Taxes are important because depending on what you invest in, there may be no federal income tax, if, for example, with a municipal bond or municipal bond fund. There may be no state income tax, particularly with Treasury bills and bonds, and some municipal bonds, depending on who's issued them and where you live. But taxes are always a factor. And then the other factor is how easily and quickly you can actually get at the money. So, for example, if it's locked away in a longer-term CD, you might be able to get at the money, but you might have to pay a penalty. And then some folks are just concerned about timing. Maybe it's in an ETF and it's going to take you 2 or 3 days to actually sell shares and have that sale go through and then actually have access to the cash. So these are all factors to think about. Having said all that, though, let me show you some specific options that I personally like. The first one, honestly, one of the best, is Vanguard's money market fund, VMFXX. It's currently paying 3.74%. The thing about this fund is I'm pretty sure you can only buy it through an account at Vanguard. Normally, if you have an account, say at Fidelity, for example, you can buy a Vanguard mutual fund. There's probably a fee if you do, but you can buy a Vanguard mutual fund. Without a fee, you can buy a Vanguard ETF. But with money market funds, I think you generally have to buy them, in this case, at Vanguard. So that's something to keep in mind. But a really good yield, 3.74%. If we compare that to one of Fidelity's popular money market funds, SPAXX, it's much lower, 3.44%. I actually own shares of this fund, so I'm losing out. That's like 30 basis points, but that's a story for another day. So yeah, Vanguard's fund, quite good. Schwab actually has a decent option. Well, this one, really good, but of course you have to have $1 million minimum initial investment. Probably not something most of us are gonna do. But their Prime Advantage Money Fund is currently paying, this is as of, I guess, yesterday. I'm recording this on Wednesday, December 17th, 3.61%. So that's a very good option as well. Again, a little bit lower than Vanguard's. But if you have your money at Schwab, a pretty good option. If you're at Fidelity and you want to do better than 344 and you have at least $100,000 to put into a money market fund, FZDXX will get you a slightly higher yield, 3.59%. Still not as good as Schwab or Vanguard, but it's getting close. Now, other options where you can buy them pretty much anywhere. These are all money market funds that I've shown you, but there are ETFs. For example, iShares has a 0 to 3 month Treasury bond ETF. It's currently paying $3.79, so that's pretty good, given today's rates. But Vanguard always outdoing folks on the short term, the cash side of things. V-bill, $3.82, so that's a really good option. And in fact, I mentioned that I own shares of SPAXX. That's a temporary thing. The nice thing about a cash management account at Fidelity is that you can invest in anything you want. I mean, SPAXX is one of the default options. You can put your money in V-bill, for example, within the cash management account at Fidelity, or for that matter, at any broker. It's an ETF. You can pretty much buy it anywhere without fees. Now, one thing I'll say, if you do have the cash management account at Fidelity, if you use one of Fidelity's money market funds like SPAXX and you write a check, they will sell shares of that money market fund for you to cover the check. If you invest in something other than that, it could be a Fidelity fund or a stock or V-bill from Vanguard, they won't automatically sell those shares to cover, say, a check, for example. So if you know you're going to spend the money and you have all your money in V-bill, for example, this fund that we were looking at, you'd have to sell shares of this ahead of time and wait a day or two till the cash becomes available in your account and then write the check. So that's just something to keep in mind for those of you that use Fidelity's cash management account. Now, you could just go straight with treasuries. If we look at it now, this is as of the 16th, the 4-week treasury bill, you can see, kind of focus on the coupon equivalent, 3.67%. But you're looking at this at 382. Now this is a little bit longer, not much, up to 3 months, but still, I'd probably just go with this. It's easier. One other thing I want to show you is that, you look at this and you think, well, wait a minute, bank discount versus coupon equivalent. What in the world does that mean? Now, I'm in Chrome. You can actually use Gemini. If you click this little button here, and you can ask it. You can give it permission to look at the tab that you're on, and you can say, as I did before I started recording this video, hey, what's the difference between the bank discount yield, and you can't see the rest of the question. Well, actually, maybe I can show you. Yeah, there we go. And the coupon equivalent, and it tells you right here. This bank discount's based on the par value. The coupon equivalent is based on the purchase price, because the purchase price can vary from the par value. Again, we're only talking 5-6 basis points here, but I just thought I'd point that out. Gemini AI can be a great tool. You can give it access to a tab you're on in Chrome and ask it whatever you want. All right, that's just bonus information for 5 Question Friday. By the way, I forgot to mention at the top of the show that I am going to show you a tool that I've been using that deals with internet safety and security that I'll show you at the end. I always forget to tell you about the tool that I'm going to show you at the end of the video, but I've got one for you today. All right, number 2 deals with student loans. This comes from Jordan. I have about $35,000 in student loans, and I'm weighing investing more in I think a Roth versus paying off the debt faster. That's the fundamental point of his question. Priorities. What should I prioritize? Now, if you're a Dave Ramsey fan, the answer is clear. It's the student loans. Once you've saved $1,000 sort of emergency fund, according to Dave, everything goes to debt except your mortgage. That comes later in his plan. I'm not a fan of that strategy. Certainly, if you have high interest debt, think credit card debt at 25% or something. Yeah, you need to tackle that and quick. But for most folks, student loans are relatively lower interest rates. And depending on the amount, now in this case, Jordan has $35,000. It could take a long time. Some of you have 6 figures in student loans. You could literally be a decade or more doing nothing but paying your student loans and foregoing a company match at a 401, with your 401k, investing what you can in a Roth IRA every year. I think that is a huge, huge mistake. So for me, there are a number of things that I personally would prioritize over paying any extra on a student loan. Of course, you're going to make your minimum payments, but unless you've got a student loan with really high interest rates, I would, of course, prioritize not just $1,000, but a full emergency fund. I would prioritize maxing out a 401k, at least enough to get the company match if you have that. I would prioritize maxing out, for most folks, a Roth IRA. And there could be other priorities important to you, like saving for a child's education, or maybe saving a down payment for a home, that I personally would prioritize over paying extra on a student loan. And that's particularly true if you've got a low rate student loan, or you're working on a payment plan where eventually there'll be some loan forgiveness down the road. I mean, that to me is a no-brainer. You wouldn't start paying that off, paying extra on that kind of debt. So, I'm all for getting out of debt. I think managing your debt is extremely important. But for me, I think there are a number of other priorities, like I've outlined, that if I were in that situation today, and I was back in the day, I had plenty of student loans, I prioritized a lot of things over paying them off. And in fact, I graduated from law school in the early 90s with student loans that in today's dollars would probably come out to about 150 grand. And I was probably 15, 17 years before I had paid those all off. Again, I could have paid them off earlier, but I had other priorities that I thought were more important. So that's my take on it, Jordan. Hopefully you find that helpful. All right, question number 3. This comes from Kevin. Hey, Rob, I don't know if you've covered the topic, but I seem to remember a while ago that you said you purchased a Schwab target date fund. Turns out I didn't, but that's okay. Kevin wants to know, what I think about them. And so let's take a quick look. Here we go. Let me get rid of Gemini. There it is. Okay. So this is the Schwab Target Date Index Fund page. I'll link to this below the video. And by the way, I'll drop links to all the other tabs that I've shown you as well. But back to the Target Index Fund. We'll look at a specific fund in just a second, but I want to stop right here. So a glide path is just a fancy term to describe how much your portfolio is invested in stocks or equities, same thing, versus bonds, or they call it fixed income, same thing. And the glide path is the idea that over time, that division between stocks and bonds might change, right? And in this glide path, this is a general approach that Schwab uses. If you can see down here, when you're 45 years away from retirement, let me make it a little bigger maybe, didn't really help. Okay, no, it didn't help at all. When you're 45 years away from retirement, it's almost all stocks. You can see up here just 3% in bonds. And then as you get closer and closer to retirement, the glide path, you gradually get more and more bonds, less and less equities. And then here's your retirement date, whatever that might be for you. And at that point, according to Schwab's target date funds, you're at 56% fixed income, 44% stocks. Now, some target date funds will stop there. Once you hit retirement, they no longer change your asset allocation. It stays fixed all the way through retirement. You can see with what Schwab's approach is, say, no, we're going to keep changing it a little bit, even while you're in retirement. And the stocks start to go down a little bit more. And it's only when you're 20 years after retirement that does it level out. Now, not all of them do it that way. So the reason I spend some time on this is if you're in a target date fund, you want to know what their glide path strategy is. And you can find out if it's Vanguard, Fidelity, wherever your target date fund is, you can get this information. And you should understand it. If you're 30, 40 years out from retirement, you probably don't need to worry about it right now. But certainly as you start to get closer, you want to know how they're changing your asset allocation, both as you get closer to retirement and then as you retire and move through retirement. As a general rule, I find that most target date funds are too conservative for me when you get near and into retirement. And this is a perfect example. Now, for those that have watched a lot of my videos, you may say, well, wait a minute, Rob, I seem to recall you're in a Vanguard target date fund that's 70% bonds. Yeah, that's true. And that does work for me because when you factor in all my other accounts, I get to about a 70 or 75% stock allocation, and that's what I wanted. So yes, a low stock target date fund in retirement may work for you, even if you want higher, more percentage in stocks, if you have other investments in Roth accounts and taxable accounts that bring your overall asset allocation to what you're looking for. And so that works for me. But if you're just in a target date fund, again, this may be what you want. You may say, no, Rob, this is exactly what I want. That's great. If that's what you want, then this will work. If it's not what you want, you'll need to find a different way to invest that money once you get to a point where their asset allocation doesn't work for you. Now, one option would be to divide your money between two Schwab retirement target date funds, right? There's no rule against that. So you could say, well, I'll stick half my money, I'll just leave it where it is, and yes, the stocks are getting lower and lower, but I'll put the other half in, I'll just make something up. The 2050 fund. And that will, when I combine those two, it gets me to the asset allocation I want. And so there's different strategies, there's a lot of different ways to get to the asset allocation you want. I just want to point that out. If we look at a specific fund, we can come down here. Here we go. So we'll just look at the 2050 fund. It's low fees, I think 14 basis points. So relatively inexpensive, and I think pretty normal for low-cost target date funds. And actually, the net expense ratio is just 8 basis points, and so that's good. You can look at the portfolio down here. So this is someone, let's think about this, retiring 25 years from now, and they're at a 50 plus 22 for international is 72, and then they also have some emerging market. So they're almost 80% stocks, not quite. Oh, actually, they are more than 80% because you've got some small cap here. So again, and they've got REITs, which I would classify like equities, right? So this is in the 85% range, roughly, I guess, maybe even a little bit more. And so I personally think that's a reasonable approach. But again, if you were planning to retire at 2050 and you said, yeah, I really wanted a little bit different than that, Rob. I mean, I appreciate, what Schwab's done here. That's okay. Just because you're going to retire in 2050 doesn't mean you can't invest your money in a 2045 fund or a 2055 fund, right? These are just guideposts to help you, but there's no target date retirement police that are going to come and say, wait a minute, what have you done? You can't invest in 2055 because you want to retire in 2050. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. You can invest in several of these, for example, as we mentioned a few minutes earlier. So yeah, I think Schwab target date funds are reasonable. The issues that I've pointed out with them in terms of asset allocation and finding exactly what you want, keep in mind, that's an issue with any target date fund. I'm not picking on Schwab. You need to kind of do the same thing at Vanguard, Fidelity, anywhere. So yeah, I think they seem reasonably good to me. All right. What's next? Question 4. This comes from Mike. Can you discuss the difference in pulling from a pre-tax account in retirement and of course paying the taxes? And the point there would be to avoid or reduce the amounts of future Roth conversions, that's what he's thinking, versus pulling from the traditional cash or brokerage accounts that most retirement software typically recommends to reduce income taxes once RMD starts. So let me kind of rephrase his question a bit. So the idea is this: a lot of the sort of standard strategy says first spend your taxable accounts, then your tax deferred, and then your Roth. But the point Mike is making is, if I spend all from my taxable accounts first, and I leave all my tax-deferred money alone, it could result in a big tax bill once RMDs start. And he points out that the podcaster, Jill on Money, who's with ABC News, likes the idea of pulling from pre-tax to avoid the RMD tax bomb. Now, I know Jill. She was kind enough to invite me on her show. I went up to New York. It was a lot of fun. She gave me a tour of the studio there, and this was several years ago. I think it was even pre-COVID, as I'm thinking now. But so it's a great question, and it raises so it's really multiple questions. So yes, we can spend our traditional IRA first. We're going to, of course, pay taxes on the money we take out. I'm assuming you're 59 and a half or older, so there's no 10% penalty. And it will reduce our RMDs. But of course, we could also do Roth conversions, right? That would be another way to reduce future RMDs if they make sense. But of course, they're a little more complicated in the sense that you now have to, make sure you've got the money to pay the taxes, right? Plus, then you still have to pull money out to spend. So that's not exactly Mike's question, but I just want to point that out, that spending money from a traditional IRA is not the only way to deal with future RMDs and the potential tax liability. But the general concept, I think, is a good one. And the way to look at it, I'm going to go to Boldin. Here we are. So this is a demo account in Boldin. And I've gone to Insights right here and their taxes. And I'm looking at the net taxable income by federal tax bracket. And you can see that for this hypothetical retiree, they're paying no taxes in 25. And of course, 25 is almost over, but they paid no taxes in 25. They're not going to end up paying any taxes in 26, very little in 27, and then taxes kick in 28. And I don't remember if that's because of Social Security, RMDs, a combination, but taxes really kick in 28. And as they get later in life, they really bump up into, in this case, the 24% tax bracket. This is not an uncommon scenario, particularly for folks that retire before they start receiving Social Security. You could have a number of years, actually, where you have no income tax, federal income tax, or very little. And then Social Security kicks in, so you start paying more taxes. RMDs kick in, they go up even higher. So as a general strategy, I think it's good to fill these low tax years with some taxable income that will then bring down these higher taxes that are likely triggered in part by RMDs that are at higher tax rates. And can you do this by simply taking early, I'll call it early, meaning before taxable account withdrawals, starting with tax deferred withdrawals? Absolutely you can. You can also do it with Roth conversions, and I think it's a good strategy. Now, the reason that I use tax or retirement planning software, Boldin really isn't tax software, but it includes a lot of tax analysis, as does a product like Projection Lab, is that the calculations, particularly when you're projecting out a number of years, it's a lot to handle. And I also, going back to Boldin, and Projection Lab's great too, I like that it shows you visually, and you can make changes. We could go into Boldin and say, okay, well, let's assume we do a distribution or a Roth conversion in 25. How will that change things? And that's, we've shown that a lot on the channel in the past, and that's an important sort of strategy to do. The thing I want to point out, this is focused on tax brackets. And obviously tax brackets are really important, but they're not the only important thing. You have to think about how income will affect your taxes on Social Security and how it will affect IRMA, which of course relates to the premiums you'll pay for Medicare. Now, this software, whether it's Projection Lab, Boldin, can do those things for you, and you just have to spend some time with the software. And I do plan some future live shows where we just talk about Boldin and Projection Lab and other retirement planning tools, and we can just, questions back and forth and work through some of these things. If that's of interest to you, let me know. I've done that in the past. I do plan some of that. I'm thinking in January after the holidays, so we can do that. But yes, I think the idea of generating some kind of taxable income in the early years of retirement, could be through IRA distributions, through Roth conversions. In some cases, it could be through realizing capital gains in a taxable account, can be a very good strategy to manage taxes in retirement. At the same time, it's probably not going to make some massive difference to your retirement plan. If you've got a plan that's not working and all the software says, that you're headed for trouble, this sort of tax strategy is probably not going to save the plan in most cases. At least that's been my experience. All right, let's get to question number 5. And I'm just pulling something up real quick. All right, question number 5. Should a TIPS ladder be part of a retirement portfolio? And let me read you the specific question, which comes from David. I am using a TIPS ladder to secure needed income in the early years of retirement before I claim Social Security at age 70. For now, I've set up the ladder just to cover those gap years. Once I hit 70, I'll have a good chunk of income covered by Social Security. The question is, should I extend the TIPS ladder beyond 70 to cover needed income above and beyond my Social Security income, or should I just do standard withdrawals from my portfolio? Great question. So here's the deal on TIPS, generally in TIPS ladders. So TIPS will tell you, when you invest in a TIP and hold it to maturity, you know exactly what you're going to get. You know you're going to say, I'll just make up a number. You're going to get a real yield of 2%. You're going to get 2% and then an inflation adjustment on top of that. So you don't know the exact dollar amount you'll get because we don't know what future inflation is. But you know that your real yield, your after inflation yield will be, let's say, 2%, and you can count on that. You can take that to the bank. And so in that sense, TIPS can be a great tool for those folks in or near retirement. Now, you give away something with a tip. So, and we always need to keep this in mind. What do we give away? We give up the upside, right? We give up the potential for more, right? That's what stocks give us, the potential for more. And if we think about, say, a 30-year TIPS ladder that might cover us through all of retirement, you're giving up a lot for a very long period of time. Now, what would be better, a 30-year TIPS bond today or the same amount invested in the S&P 500? Well, the short answer is we don't know. If we look at history, the history would tell us the S&P 500, but that's not a guarantee. And so my thinking on TIPS ladders is I think they can be a very good tool. In the short term, I think they're a no-brainer. You want to like David's doing, you want to bridge the gap for a few years to when you start taking Social Security, yet you're giving up the upside, but for a relatively short period of time and for a very specific reason. Makes all kinds of sense to me. It's not the only way to do it, but I think it's very reasonable. You start building a 30-year TIPS ladder, you're giving up the upside for 3 decades. Why would we do that? Now, I think there's a good answer to that. Some would say, look, figure out what your required spending is in retirement. Not the nice to have stuff. They might be important, but travel and, I don't know, the sports car you want to buy or whatever it is you want to have fun. Really important, but if you couldn't do those things, life wouldn't end, right? But you need to keep the heat on, and you need food, and you need shelter. So what are your necessary expenses? And do you have those covered through guaranteed income like a pension, Social Security? If you do, then that's great. You probably don't need a TIPS ladder, really. But what if you don't? What if you say, no, I still need, I'll just make up a number, $10,000 a year for necessary spending? I think a TIPS ladder can do a really good job of meeting that need. Now, we have to keep in mind, TIPS ladders don't last forever. 30 years is the longest TIPS bond that the U.S. government sells. So now in this case, David is 70. He might say, yeah, what are the odds I'm going to live past 100? Well, they're not very good, but they're probably not zero. So you just have to keep that in mind. TIPS ladders protect us to a large degree from longevity, particularly if you're building a 30-year TIPS ladder at 70, but not 100%. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. I wouldn't prevent me from using a TIPS ladder in David's case. In fact, I might at some point set up a TIPS ladder myself for that very reason. But I'm not going to go overboard with it because, again, I'm willing to give up the upside for spending that I absolutely have to have. But I don't think I'm willing to give up the upside for everything else. At least that's my choice. Of course, you have to make the best decision for you. But yeah, I think a TIPS ladder, even after you start receiving Social Security, can be a great part of a portfolio, particularly if, in my case, my thinking on it is if you're going to be using that money for necessary spending in retirement. Okay, great questions. Now, I want to show you a tool that I've started using that I really like, and here it is. So it's called Aura. So just a little background. I was really looking at VPNs. In fact, I mentioned a couple in my newsletter that goes out, and but I was still looking. Aura does offer VPN. They offer a lot, as you can see, but I got hooked on Aura because, as you can see from that drop-down list, it does a lot more than just VPN. It can monitor your credit if you want, identity theft protection. It can remove online data about you, which I've implemented. You can see it's got a VPN, of course, which, if you're not familiar with the VPN, Virtual Private Network, it basically prevents folks from seeing what you're doing on the internet. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Rob, what are you doing on the internet? Well, for me, it's 2 things. One, when I'm at home, like I am now, recording this, if I don't have my VPN on, my internet service provider can see all my web traffic and they sell that data. I don't want to give them that data. And then when I'm on a public Wi-Fi, who knows who's looking at my internet traffic? I don't want them to see it, right? So yeah, that's why I use a VPN. But in any event, it also has antivirus software, which I've started using. It has password manager, which I have not yet tested. I use a different password manager. I'm going to test their password manager. And they have spam call protection, which was actually what really got me focused on Aura. And here's the reason. I get like 4, 5, 6 spam voicemails every single day. Drives me crazy. I don't know how that happened. So I've implemented their spam call protection, and it did a pretty good job yesterday. It didn't eliminate all of them. I just set it up, so we're going to see. But that was what actually got me really interested in Aura. And then I haven't used any of these because our children are grown, but they have a lot of child online safety features, as you can see. And so if you have children, that could be very useful. So I mentioned this, I'm still testing it. If you use it, I'd like to know. They are a partner. They haven't sponsored this video. I don't do sponsored videos, at least I haven't yet. Who knows, maybe I will someday, but I haven't. But they are an affiliate, so I get a fee if you sign up for them. So keep that in mind. It helps support the channel, but obviously just look at it if you think it's something useful to you. So far, I really like it. And by the way, I'm testing many. I've used NordVPN. I've used TunnelBear. Yeah, there's a VPN called TunnelBear. I've used ExpressVPN. So I'm testing a lot of them. But so far, I really like Aura. And there's also a big discount they're offering. I'll put details below the video. So there you go. Hopefully, this has been useful. Like I said, I'm going to start doing some frequently asked question videos around a single topic. I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully you'll find those useful as well. I got to somehow figure out how to get through thousands of questions. So that's what I'm doing as best I can. So anyway, hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, leave them below the video in the comments. Be happy to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.